You're listening to a podcast of spurious morality.
Hello and welcome to a podcast of Spurious Morality. I'm Johnstone and with me I have Mansoor.
Hello.
And I have Greg.
Hello.
And after over a year-long drought of Doctor Who, we're talking about our fourth recent episode, which still feels a bit weird. Since this podcast started, there have been 5 episodes of Doctor Who broadcast and 4 of them have been all within the space of 1 month and fairly recent. So it's weird to have so much new Doctor Who, but we have got a bit of a break now. But we talked about the other 3 specials, so we thought we'd probably better talk about this one too. And thankfully, it was rather quite enjoyable. I enjoyed it anyway. So just quick overall, what did you think of it? Mansoor, you go first.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was really good. I don't know exactly what I was expecting, but it wasn't quite the sort of complete break and sort of entirely new era that maybe I had in my mind. There was a lot that was common or sort of familiar from the past, but I really liked the new Doctor. I really liked the new companion. And the story was decent enough. And yeah, we'll get onto the specifics, I'm sure, in a moment. But yeah, very positive overall.
Excellent stuff. And what about you, Greg?
Yeah, I enjoyed it too. It's very RTD in all the best ways, and some of the weaker ways, but mostly the best ways. I thought the new Doctor and Companion were fantastic. I liked how the show took. It seems to be taking a little bit more of a fantastical turn with these going forward. If this story is to be any example, which I think is interesting and welcome in many ways. And just hearing some of the behind the scenes stuff was interesting. It definitely feels in many ways, like RTD era 1, but at the same time, it does feel like something heading off into a new era, and I like it for that. And I'm very curious to see where it goes.
It's definitely not sort of what if Russell T Davies had carried on and this was the start of Series 5. It's definitely not an immediate continuation of where Russell T Davies left off, but you're both very right in terms of it being very him and it being quite safe, actually. I think that, we've talked about expectations already, and there were sort of big expectations. What's it going to be? How's this brave new era going to be? And I think really what we got was a very safe, reliable, dependable Russell T Davies episode, which set up the new Doctor nicely. I know we saw him a bit in the Giggle, but this was really his first proper go at being the Doctor on his own. We met Ruby, new companion. We got a bit about her background and her family, and there's a mystery behind her setup. It's quite Moffat-y, actually, sort of the mystery behind the companion. No doubt that's going to be something that gets sort of picked up further down the line, I think. But yeah, it was a solid sort of hour of adventure with 2 characters meeting each other and becoming a TARDIS team.
A lot in common with Rose, I think. Although when it's not maybe not fair to make direct comparisons, but like I feel like Rose is much more of a masterclass in how to relaunch a series to a new audience. Um, just okay, there's little bits like the rubbish bins and the CGI for Mickey that we look back and could possibly have been tidied up a little bit, but as a script, as a story, I think it's like masterfully structured in terms of introducing the Doctor, but doing it from Rose's point of view. I felt like Church on Ruby Road was doing some of that, but the structure of this new story wasn't quite as tight. It felt a bit more chaotic, a bit more messy, um, and it was trying to do some of the same thing of like taking Ruby's point of view, but then we see a lot of the Doctor before we have the two of them meet, and then and the sort of first, second, third act structure was a bit strange for me as well. That like you sort of have this setup of the goblins, and then you kind of jump straight to this to the sort of end with the conclusion. So yeah, that stood out to me a little bit. The kind of shape of the story.
I think the thing that this had that Rose didn't, I guess, would have been the extra 15 minutes. Now, Rose is a
Mm.
masterclass and it's quite fast paced. It's not too fast. It's not the Daleks in colour, but it's it's really, really well paced and perfectly paced for that 45 minutes. I do actually wonder
Yeah.
if this had benefited from being 15 minutes shorter than it was, just in terms of that structure and that tightness that you were talking about.
Maybe it just does some odd stuff as well, which like it lands because of the performances, like the stuff about Ruby disappearing, and you feel that because of the performances from Ncuti Gatwa and from her mum. Um, but it's kind of an odd decision to like introduce a brand new character and then like try to make you feel sad about her disappearing. It feels like maybe that's a trick you'd play like a few episodes into a series once she's established. And then that kind of disrupts the structure of the whole story a little bit for me as well, because then it should be about these two characters getting to know each other, but then she's kind of absent for a chunk of that later half.
Yeah, I did think exactly the same thing. It is a bit strange to disappear your character for a bit, and because we'd actually already met the Doctor in the Giggle, maybe it'd have been better getting rid of the Doctor and having Ruby bring him back somehow, so we got to know her a bit better and she had that extra time as well.
I do think that disappearing her does tell you a bit more about her, though, insofar as you see what her mom's life would have been like had Ruby never come into it, and that really shows what kind of an influence she had on inspiring her mom to continue fostering like she did. So I think there's some value to it, but I agree it's a little confusing.
Yeah, it'd have been a shame to lose that scene because it was, really dark, really powerful. And I think, again, like the Giggle, there was actually some really dark stuff hidden in this episode that was kind of perhaps buried under, an excitable Doctor and bombastic music and, the pacing and all this kind of thing. There was some pretty dark stuff. And again, it just feels like we didn't quite get the full impact of just how dark that was. And we know Russell T Davies can write dark. We know Russell T Davies can write dark on Christmas Day. It may not be anyone's
Waters
favourite
of Mars,
episode,
yeah.
but Voyage of the Damned, yeah, Voyage of the Damned is exactly how, and Waters of Mars, yeah, they're both sort of exactly how to combine sort of I guess, the frivolity of Christmas and the darkness of what's going on in the adventure itself. But yeah, I thought it was a really good, strong episode. It is a little bit RTD by numbers, and it does, what it needs to do: introduce the new Doctor properly, introduce the new companion, and just give us an hour of something nice to do on Christmas Day.
It's RTD by numbers, but like I think when we say that, we kind of overlook how ludicrously good of a TV writer he is, because what he does better than almost anyone is introduce characters. Like, he has just this ability to give you one scene with someone and you know everything about them, and that's exactly what he's doing here. I mean, it's obviously multiple scenes with the principal characters, but I mean, what I love about his writing, and what I think is very similar between this and Rose, going back to his first episode, is that by the end of this story, like, you don't know the bit about her background, but you have a pretty darn good idea who Ruby Sunday is and how she's going to react in certain situations. And I think that's a testament to his ability.
I think she's a very Russell T Davies companion as well. She's already got a very strong, very unique personality. And I think with some other companions, they have just kind of popped up and that's it. They're the companion now. But there's definitely something about Ruby's character that's going to make her, a good special companion in the way that Rose was, in the way that Donna was. And yeah, like you say, Russell T Davies is great at doing that and kind of letting you know everything about them very quickly.
What did you both think about the mystery stuff? Because it has to do with Ruby, but like there's a lot of threads that are set up in this episode as well.
What I like about it is that it's not, it is set up as a mystery, but it's a mystery more for the audience. Like, it's not really set up as a mystery for the characters. Like, we know that Ruby wants to find out, you know, about her biological parents, right? We know that. But there's no, like, and we know that the doctor saw, the what we assume is her mother walking away, and didn't go to see who it was. But unlike when we introduced, like when Clara was introduced, for example, it was very, like, consciously, like, the story was going to be, what's the deal with Clara, what's
That
going
was a
on
whole
here.
character pretty much in the
Right.
her first season.
Whereas here we've got it set up, to find these things out, but at the same time, if it doesn't get mentioned for the next 4 or 5 episodes, I'm not going to feel like I'm being cheated or anything like that. I think it'll come up when it does, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be the dominant thread. I think it's just one of many things that'll be put through it.
I wonder if we'll get some kind of equivalent to Father's Day, maybe, as one episode. But it feels more like it's setting up for that than a big Bad Wolf style, what was the mystery of the whole series finale. Yeah.
Well, that's a very different type of thread, isn't it? Like, because Bad Wolf was just like this kind of random phrase in isolation that means nothing. At least with these mysteries, they've got something to do with the characters. Like they've got a personal dimension.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. And I'm sure it will pan out. It's something that Russell T Davies won't just leave hanging. It's not something that Big Finish is going to answer in 20 years' time. Um, it's like, and it turns out her dad was Bilal all along. Yeah, it's something that is going to get addressed, I think. So when we discussed the giggle, there was so much to talk about that we barely got a chance to talk about Ncuti Gatwa as the new Doctor. We agreed that it was an excellent 15 minutes that he was on screen. It was a great setup, but that's what it was. It was a setup. It was a finale for the 14th Doctor, for David Tennant's Doctor, and it was a sort of a new beginning for Ncuti Gatwa's Doctor. So it was really busy setting things up, let's have a TARDIS each, let's, all this sort of thing. And it kind of let us forego the post-regenerative sulk crisis, whatever you want to call it, whatever it'd be, we're straight in. We're straight into a new adventure with the Doctor already in his costume, doing doctory things, very much in the same way that we were with Rose. And obviously, the fact that Rose already has an established Ninth Doctor that appears to have not just regenerated has given Big Finish the gap they need to do the thing. And I kind of wonder if it is very similar here. This Doctor has existed already. How long has he existed for? How long has this Doctor been the Doctor? It could have been 10 minutes for all we know. Church on Ruby Road is 10 seconds after the giggle for him. It could equally be that it's been years and years and years and years and years, and he's had loads of adventures, and we've no sort of baggage like the Time War to be looking at this time. In fact, the whole point of the giggle, the whole point of what's gone on is there is no baggage surrounding this new Doctor. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see if we get a hint as to how long he's been around and what he's done, and maybe that's something that Russell T Davies isn't bothered about now. But if Ncuti Gatwa ever ends up a Big Finish, I've got a pretty good idea that we'll find out. But I thought he was great. I just thought he was immediately the Doctor, and I'm glad we didn't do the whole he's regenerated, he needs to be asleep for 45 minutes of an episode thing. I'm glad we just went straight into it. We've got this new Doctor, he's doing doctory things still, and he's kind of living outside of his usual, or the Doctor's usual lifestyle. We're seeing him going dancing in a nightclub and all that kind of thing. And okay, you could argue he was just there because he was keeping an eye on Ruby, but nevertheless, he was having fun and dancing in a nightclub. It's the Doctor on a day off. It's great.
I think it's that tone of like you're saying, no baggage. I think, as well as establishing this is who this new Doctor is, I think that nightclub scene was about saying that, yeah, he's kind of in that paradoxical way. He's done that therapy stuff through 14, and the 15th Doctor is now a little more baggage free. And I think a really nice moment is when he just like opens up about being adopted, just in the space of like knowing these people for a few minutes, when the 13th Doctor seemed to have such a massive issue with opening up in a similar way to Yaz and other companions about being the timeless child. He just says it in a kind of a very matter of fact, honest way. And I think that was a really deliberate decision to show that this new Doctor is a bit more at peace with himself and a bit more open.
Yeah, absolutely. And I quite like that shift. And one thing I have missed is, and I've sort of mentioned this before, one thing I've missed is sort of the Doctor and companions having fun. We get an awful lot of talk about how amazing travelling in the TARDIS is, and we see all these things, we do all these things, but because of sort of the nature of Doctor Who and the requirements of entertaining an audience for 45, 50, 60 minutes, we always see some kind of Doctor Who adventure going on, some kind of villain to fight or whatever, and we don't see the Doctor and companions chilling out. And when you think back, actually, we used to get a lot of that. When you think back to the classic series, we got things like, the Doctor took Leela
Ivor Iron.
Well, yeah, and Talons of Wen Chiang, the Doctor and Leela went to London just to kind of go to the theatre and have a bit of a laugh as part of Leela's education, and going fishing at the start of Two Doctors, all this kind of thing. The first episode of The Chase is almost entirely the Doctor, Vicky, Ian, and Barbara just sunbathing. And I'm not even
Start of the
misremembering that.
Romans.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, there's that couple of week gap, isn't there?
But they're just having a nice holiday.
So it's nice to get things like that put back in, because a lot of, particularly during the Whittaker era, a lot of adventures had already started when we joined them. When we first started Flux, the Doctor and Yaz was it dangling over a pool of acid or something like that? And we were mid-adventure on that space train with Cybermen in The Power of the Doctor. So it's nice to not be mid-adventure. It's nice to actually stop for a little bit and something come organically out of nowhere, which is kind of what did happen here. But I've rambled on long enough, so I'm gonna go to Greg and just sort of give us a few thoughts on the new Doctor.
I think he's fantastic, honestly. You've talked about how nice it is to see him relaxing and at peace, and I think that seeing that. Granted, we don't know how long he's been around, but that certainly tells us that all of the 14th Doctor's rest and recovery and post-adventure therapy time has contributed to this Doctor's personality, I would imagine. But he's got this infectious energy about him. I mean, Paul McGann in the TV movie is about the only other Doctor who is this just thrilled and excited to be doing what he's doing. And everything practically has a grin on his face. Like, even the life-threatening situations, he's just amazed at how cool it is. Like, he's you can absolutely see why someone would want to travel with him, and why he would be so much fun to be with, and why he is appealing to Ruby, or any companion, really. I really liked the scene with him and the police officer, because, well, first of all, we heard in the commentary that scene was actually the result of a note from Disney saying that people wanted to see the Doctor earlier, and RTD agreed with that and said, yeah, you know what, we should do that. And it's interesting because, like, when you have the scene with him in the club, it's kind of like setting up, like, ooh, who's this mysterious figure that Ruby is meeting, but then we just go to him in the next scene. So it does undercut the mystery and from Ruby's perspective part of it a little bit. But honestly, like, even though this is supposed to be a jumping on point, like, everyone knows what's going on here. Like, I don't really think we need to keep the Doctor shrouded in mystery. And just that little scene is so perfect. Like, when he assures the policeman that his fiance or his girlfriend is going to say yes when he proposes and says Merry Christmas, like, that to me was my, like, oh yeah, this is the Doctor moment. I mean, even not taking away from what happened in the giggle, but, like, there's always that moment, like, in a Doctor's first episode, when you're like, oh yeah, this is the person. And that was it for me. But yeah, I mean, just his infectious enthusiasm is what I take away from this. There's little hints of emotional depth to him, and Ncuti Gat was a very good actor, so I anticipate we're going to see a lot more of that. But yeah, I mean, this one's just to hit the ground running with him and show, like, yeah, this is someone that you'd want to explore the universe with, and it absolutely does that. He's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, like you say, hit the ground running just straight away. We've got a new Doctor. We know he's going to be fantastic. I mean, we knew that in the giggle, but this has just sort of really hammered home how brilliant this is going to be. And I'm really sort of looking forward to seeing what happens now. And I've always looked forward to new Doctor Who. I will always look forward to new Doctor Who, but I'm really looking forward to this. Anything you want to add, Mansour?
Not much. I think just just his dynamic with Ruby stood out as well. Like, even with that stuff about her disappearing for part of the story in the second half, they just instantly work well together. So yeah, looking forward to seeing both of them back.
Well, we'll move straight on to next talking point, which is obviously Ruby. And as we've said, she's had a pretty good introduction, and we've got this mystery behind her. But just sort of, what about the character? What about Millie Gibson? What kind of thing do we think there? Again, Greg, do you want to go first?
I like Ruby too. I think there's every Doctor Who companion is going to at least have some commonality, because no matter who they are, they're going to need to have the, both the love for adventure that gets them into the TARDIS, and the the grounding and maturity that's going to allow them to appreciate what they're doing and face up to whatever challenges they see. And we definitely see both of those things in spades in Ruby. What I like about her is that, when we had, she's presented as being 19 here, and I believe that was the same age as Rose was presented in the first, in her first season. But I feel like Ruby feels more like a 19-year-old than Rose did, I guess. And part of that's because Millie Gibson is herself that age. But also, just like, she's a little more unsure about the world. Like, she's carrying this little bit of insecurity with her about, the, who, what's the identity of her, her biological parents. It's interesting to see. She's you can see when she's like up on stage, like, performing, she's not the lead, she's kind of in the background a little bit. um but at the same time, she's not like shy or withdrawn or anything like that. Like, she's got a very commanding personality. And I mean, her relationship with her mom and her grandmother are just fantastic. Like, she's a really appealing character. Like, and again, I think that's the key. Like, much with the Doctor, like, you have to like the companion. I mean, you have to have this. You have to look at this person, and as much as you have to look at the Doctor and say, I want to travel with him, you also need to look at the companion and say, I want to travel with her. And that is certainly what happens here. I mean, you can see why these two characters are drawn to each other. You can see that, she's not as confident as the Doctor, but at the same time, like, she still shares this, like, enthusiasm for adventure. Like, the fact that she's visibly scared of heights, but she's more than willing to try to push that aside, to save the baby, or to, do what needs to be done. Like, that's a nice little character moment that really isn't remarked upon. No one ever says, "Oh, you're afraid of heights, eh?" But you can clearly see that she is. And yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. I'm rambling a little bit here because, we still have so much to learn about her, but at the same time, like, it's a compelling performance, and I enjoyed it, and I'm very interested to see how she develops as the first season goes on.
Absolutely agreed. Just such a really, really strong and compelling start. And, I actually think, I mean, it's hard to say after just one episode, but I actually think that the one thing this has done, I know we keep comparing it to Rose, but I suppose the reasons for that are obvious. I really do feel like I'm going to get on with this character a lot more after one episode than I did with Rose after Rose. I actually think it's done a better job of introducing this companion character than Rose did, and Rose was, virtually flawless in terms of what it was trying to do and what it did. So yeah, it's that aspect was certainly done brilliantly. I still wish that she'd have been around for the whole episode and not had 15 minutes where she ducked out. But that's it. It's not a character grumble by any stretch of the imagination. Anything you want to add, Mansoor?
Well, like I was saying, I think it's impressive that she made such a positive impression, even with dropping out the story for that amount of time. Yeah, I think, like we've all said, like, a good performance and just like a really likable performance. I don't know if it's the writing or the actor, or both, but she and this comes back to the thing about, getting back to the Doctor and Companion, just having fun and, yeah, moving past some of the baggage that we've had in the past. Uh, it feels like she's going to have a really fun, nice dynamic with the Doctor. Um, so yeah, really likable character in her own right, and then her relationships with the mother, with the grandmother, um, they all tell you something about the character and are also interesting to see in and of themselves as well. And yeah, like I was saying before, when the timeline changes and you see what effect her absence has, I think that's a good point. That does tell you something about how important Ruby has been to her mother as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really good way to establish her, I think, and it's. I do think maybe her sort of getting to the TARDIS and wandering in, wandering around it. Maybe that was a bit rushed. We didn't actually go inside the TARDIS. We kind of saw it all from outside the TARDIS, and again, it's one of those things that kind of assumes you know what's going on here. Like, if you're watching this, you know what the TARDIS is and you know what she's witnessing and all that kind of thing. But it would have been a bit rubbish to reveal that TARDIS console room for the third time in 4 episodes.
Well, I wonder if they're saving that because I don't know how much truth there is, but I've seen comments or speculation or reporting that it's really going to be from episode 1 of the new series that Disney are going to push the promotion. So maybe that first walk around the TARDIS console, the first conversation with the Doctor where he actually explains that he's an alien and all of that, maybe that happens at the start of episode 1 in May. And so that then also works as a jumping on point for new viewers who are starting with that story.
It is interesting to see what Disney is doing, because I mean that's how I'm watching the show, is on Disney Plus, and
It's branded as Special 4, isn't it, on
yeah,
Disney
that's
Plus?
weird. Like I can understand 1, 2, and 3 because those were decided on before the Disney deal went through supposedly, and you know Disney did absolutely no promotion for those whatsoever. But I mean, it did like separate trailers for this, and yet it's still just Special 4, which does not scream to me this is a jumping on point. But I don't know.
You had something different in the end of the Disney Plus version, I think, because in the UK version we just had that mid-credit scene in the credits. But I think, did you have like a sort of additional trailer or like something about like the new home of Doctor Who or something in the
Yeah,
Disney Plus version?
it wasn't a trailer. It did like the Disney Plus logo, and then had like one of those things where like words go up on the screen, like shoom shoom, that kind of thing. But
Right.
it was just like Doctor Who on Disney or something like that. It didn't tell you. It wasn't like anything about the show. I don't remember what it
Okay.
said. I'd have to watch it again. But yeah, it did that, and then it did the mid credit sequence, and then it did the credits. So
Right.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, they're obviously well invested in it anyway, and it'll be interesting to see sort of how it does get ramped up when May comes along. And equally, it'll be interesting to see sort of what else is coming out of it, because we're on to filming of series 2 now. I mean, that's well underway, I believe, judging by things that are on Twitter and so on. Which does that mean that we're getting it same time next year? Is May now Doctor Who month? Is that something that's established, or are we going to have an 18-month gap, or is it actually going to be 2 years before we see it, and are they going to sit some kind of spin-off that may or may not feature Unit in the middle? Or it's going to be kind of interesting to see what the format of the show is now that Disney are on board.
That's kind of like the Disney model with things like Star Wars and Marvel, and you could say that they've overreached with some of those big franchises with doing too much. But like the idea of like never going too long without some sort of spin-off being being put out.
Yeah, because I'm looking at Star Wars. I'm looking at The Mandalorian, where we had 2 series, one pretty much immediately a year after the other, and then we had Boba Fett, and then we had more Mandalorian, sort of 18-ish months after that. So it's going to be interesting to see just how consistent it is, or if it has any impact at all. I'd certainly like to get back to, can we have a series each year? And if the cost of that is a reduced episode count, then so be it. I'd rather have 8 episodes every year, 8 episodes per year plus a special, than 10 episodes over 2 years or 18 months or 3 years, whatever. I've seen people tweeting about the episode count, but actually, if a shorter episode count means series more regularly, we're probably actually going to get more Doctor Who.
They've also been pretty clear that Disney is not running the show here. The BBC is still in charge, and RTD specifically is still in charge. And he's talked about how he thinks that Doctor Who should, have like the Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of thing going, because there's so many characters and so many stories that can be told. But I mean, I don't think there's anything that's going to get off the ground without his say so. And I, as much as I like some of the stuff that, say, Dave Filoni has done for Star Wars. He's basically a Star Wars super fan first, and then a writer and producer second. Whereas RTD is always, as much as he is a gigantic Doctor Who fan, probably more than any of us, he's a writer and producer first, and he'll always put his fan instinct on the back burner if it's not good for the show. And I think that is something to be optimistic about going forward.
I was just going to add about like the episode count that you mentioned. Like, as well as the show coming out regularly, which is a good thing, I'm willing to take a lower episode count if it means that the actual episode's quality is more consistent. So like a really strong 8-episode run is better than a sort of mixed 10 or 12 episode run. And so you'd hope that fewer episodes means that they can put the time in, both like pre-production and post, to get each one as good as possible.
I think it's probably fair to say that, I know that Flux's episode count was for very different COVID-y reasons, but I think it's fair to say that Flux actually worked really well because it was only 6 episodes, wasn't it? And I like Flux. I thought it was good, and it didn't feel like there was any. I'm hesitant to use the word filler, but an episode that's not particularly of consequence, shall we say. So I'm thinking of things like, I don't know, I guess Praxius, which I enjoyed. It was a decent enough episode, but it didn't sort of do anything beyond its 50-minute runtime. And I'm kind of okay losing episodes like that, because it's nice to have things that are self-contained. It's nice to have things that are good, but it kind of it feels like it just kind of kills the momentum of the series a little bit. We'd had Fugitive of the Jadoon, which had kind of really got a few balls rolling in terms of where the series was going and set up a few mysteries and introduced us to a whole new Doctor. And then the week after that, it was not much happened, and it did kind of take the wind out of the sails, where I think actually we'd have benefited if we'd have gone from something like Fugitive of the Jadoon straight to, maybe not straight to Villa Diodati, but onto something a bit more storyline related, something that kind of continued the mystery, follow what's going on. And it's one thing I really liked about the sort of 60th anniversary specials trilogy was, even though we had Wild Blue Yonder, which wasn't a filler episode, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a lower key episode, but it all felt connected because it was this one sort of journey. I mean, it was only really a day or two in the Doctor and Donna's life, that trilogy was, and I really liked that. It felt so coherent, and it felt like there was some real momentum and that we were on the journey with them.
Yeah, Series 6 I think was bad for that in particular, because you had all this earth-shattering stuff about Amy and the pregnancy and River, and then you had these again, like you said, they're not bad in themselves, but just where they sit, these episodes that sort of break the flow a little bit. Like Series 6 could have been a really, really strong serialized 8 episode run, rather than the sort of slightly disjointed version that we actually got on screen.
But I think when you're talking about this, you have to look back at what did RTD's original era look like versus Moffat's era versus Chibnall's era. Like, well, I mean, first of all, in the Chibnall era, like Series 11 is very much its own thing, and there's some little ongoing character beats in there, but that's mostly just a series of standalone adventures. And I mean, granted, I'm not the biggest fan of that season, but it's not because of the adventures being standalone. I think the issue that you run into with Doctor Who is that it's very difficult to do like a serialized story like that because of the massive scale that the show takes place on. And when you start doing serialized stories like that, you start like prompting the audience to ask questions about like, well, why doesn't the Doctor just use his time travel ability, blah blah blah. But if you look back at series 1 through 4, I mean, there's sure there's ongoing plot threads, but it's really just like someone says "bad wolf" every once in a while, or someone mentions Saxon every once in a while, or there's a ghost of Rose appearing in the background. What's going on there? Like it's not trying to set up this like intensely serialized material. Whatever's carrying on is mostly character related. And granted, I have no idea what Russell is going to do with this series coming up. I mean, who knows? But I would expect it to be more like his old season series where there isn't like the strong serialized component. I would expect a lot of standalone episodes. And to me, like as long as those give you like some more insight into the characters, as long as it's like something that's enjoyable to spend time with them, I don't have a problem with that. What I have an issue with is the scenario that you're describing where they set up like this really obvious like this is the plot, this is the mystery that needs to be solved, and then the next episode has nothing to do with it, and you're like, well, what are you doing? Like, is it the mystery or not? That's what bothers me. But I don't think we're going to see that. I really don't.
I think he's described it himself in the behind the scenes stuff. Like I think specifically the Mrs. Flood question and mystery. He's used the phrase slow burn. So I think you're completely right that it's going to be a lot of very fresh standalone stories before we get to any big progression of those mysteries and arcs.
Hopefully. I don't want us to lose standalone episodes, but I do feel as though, a shorter run time does give you less time to do that. But then again, we know that they're filming series 2 now. So we're not really talking about 8 episodes. We're talking about 16 episodes plus presumably another special. So we'll kind of see how that goes. I think sort of a bit of a story that stretches over a few series definitely wouldn't do any harm. Like, we know Doctor Who's safe, and back in 2005, we didn't really. Okay, they announced series 2 and 3 straight after Rose, but when he was writing that first series, he had no idea that he'd have 2 series, 3 series, 4 series to work with. Whereas this time, he kind of does. Like, it ain't going to get cancelled after 8 episodes. That's not going to happen at this point. Well, we'll move on. And just obviously, a big part of the Church of Ruby Road was the goblins and the song, which we heard so much about and even charted in the UK and all this kind of thing. And there was a good musical chunk of the episode. The Doctor and Ruby got in on it, and I thought it was quite fun. It kind of carried on I'm thinking the Spice Girls scene from The Giggle, sort of the very silly meshed up with the very sinister. So let's just talk about sort of the episode, the goblins, the resolution, anything else you want to add about it, really. So do you want to go first, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I saw all I know that the Goblin song charted, and I know that people have been arguing about it on social media for much longer than the episode's actually been on. But I don't know. It didn't seem that significant to me, honestly. It just seemed like a fun little scene in the middle of the episode. Like it didn't bother me at all, really. Ncuti Gat was a really good singer. I learned that, but no, I mean, I think the song aside, I think when I said at the top of our episode here that some of the weaknesses of the RTD era are on display in this story. I think the goblins are an example of that. I love the concept of it. I love again that they're more fantastical. I love that the doctor is like having conversations with rope, like it's really going away from like the hard science grounding, and I'm fine with that. I just think that the goblins themselves like really feel like an afterthought in the story. Like they're really just there as a plot device to get the doctor and Ruby together, and because of that, when the doctor still has to resolve the actual problem of the goblins, it almost feels like a little rushed, a little perfunctory, like. And I think that's because the story focuses so heavily on the characters that it's to the detriment of the plot a little bit. And I'm okay with that because I will always take a character focus over a plot focus. That's just me. But I can understand why people who are more plot oriented would have watched this and been like, well, what the heck is, what happened to the goblins? Like, why aren't we learning more about them? Why aren't they doing more? And yeah, I think that's really my only issue with it. But again, to me, not a big deal. Song, don't care, but I know a lot of people will disagree.
I just kind of read it as another time traveling alien race that feasts on something a bit parasitic. It's kind of your classic Doctor Who villain, really. We've seen a lot of iterations of that, and I don't feel the need to know that the goblins come from the planet Goblonia and they developed time travel in the 1500s. I'm not bothered about any of that. Um, it served its purpose, and it was it was a fun, good chunk of the episode. They made a good villain.
Well, I mean, looping back to the comparisons to Rose, I think they pretty much fulfill exactly the same role as the Autons. They're a threat, and like you've got the big blob of Nestine consciousness at the end. You have the King Goblin in this one, but I think the difference is that they're like a new species, and there is something quite different and special about all this stuff about coincidence and magic, and I feel like that was quite a rich, interesting theme that got a bit buried amongst all the other stuff about like introducing Ruby and the new Doctor and her family. And I hope we come back to that, and maybe it's going to be tied in with those hints that the Toymaker was dropping about other gods and monsters and this pantheon and hordes that are on the way. I wouldn't mind delving back into that and seeing how the Doctor copes with this new universe where there's new rules and new threats. Um, but they looked really good. I didn't mind the song. I think it was released for charity, so I'm not going to begrudge them putting it out. But I think it sort of hurt it a little bit to be so familiar with that scene with the music video. If that had just popped up as a nice surprise within the episode, I think it would have been slightly better. Um, Especially as that's like most of what we see of the goblins. There's not a lot more to their appearance other than that musical number. Um, but I thought it worked okay, and yeah, like I said, I would like to see more of those sort of fantastical, magical elements to mix things up in future stories.
Yeah, it's sort of moving into the fantastical stuff. It definitely gave me a sort of a. I mean, I suggested this when we talked about the giggle. It sort of had echoes of the Seventh Doctor era when he starts chasing after gods and all this kind of thing. And I sort of do genuinely wonder if that's where all of this is going. If we're going to end up with some Seventh Doctor style battle against gods of Ragnarok and all this kind of thing. I'm holding on to that bit of speculation and the fact that the goblins have kind of subtly brought more of a a fantasy-esque element into Doctor Who. Maybe. Like I say, I'm sticking with it. I'm carrying on with that bit of speculation until I'm proved wrong, which, fine if I am. But it kind of links into our last point of discussion, actually, which is things that have been left hanging. The obvious one is obviously Mrs. Flood and that mid-credit scene. You know, she knows what TARDIS is. Oh my God. The toy maker mentioned that things were coming, that there was one being that even he wouldn't mess with, and it kind of suggests that we are heading towards some kind of awesome power type villain. And maybe Mrs. Flood somehow ties into that. I don't know. Don't know if you've got anything you want to add to that, Greg.
It's hard to say because, like I was just saying before, RTD has this tendency to layer in these, suggestions about things that are coming and then not pick up on them for a long time, or pick up on them in a way that's completely different from what you think he might have been setting up. So it's hard to say in that respect. I mean, obviously there is something with Mrs. Flood that's going to, come back later. Like, you don't just have a character look straight into camera and talk about the TARDIS if you're not, setting something up. You wouldn't have the toy maker say, my legions are coming, if, something isn't on the way. But I mean, I just have a hard time commenting on it because I genuinely have no idea where it's going. The only thing I would say is that, I've also seen people like, oh, what about the hand that picked up the Master's ring? And like, to me, that was just a gag. Like, that was just an obvious visual reference back to the end of Last of the Time Lords. And I really don't think there's anything to be taken away from that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that just seemed like a joke to me. But I don't know. I'm honestly, I'm just going into this upcoming series 1 or season 1 or whatever they're calling it with an open mind, and I'm excited to see where it goes. But in terms of what's going to be picked up on, I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm certainly not expecting some massive battle with Fenric, but I do wonder if the concept of higher beings, higher powers, that kind of thing is going to be sort of flooded into it a little bit. Anything you want to add, Mansoor?
Just to say, I think the chances are quite high that we'll see some of this developed in some way in this next 8-episode run, just based on what we've seen in the episodes, but also Russell T Davies has been saying that it's coming, and I think he's like a very thoughtful promoter of the show, and I don't think he'd be hyping up something that's 2 years away. I think he'd be dropping these hints about something that is on the way this year. So yeah, we don't know what form it will take, but I think we're going to see something in 2024. And yeah, like I said before, I'm quite excited about that. Like, Russell T Davies wrote a book in the New Adventures series of books, and while I'm not expecting him to suddenly turn the show into a direct adaptation of those novels, it's not beyond the realms of possibilities that he's going to pull in some elements of what the Seventh Doctor was going up against in those stories.
Damaged Goods remade for TV would be absolutely brilliant, though.
It would make a good Torchwood story, I think, like a Torchwood movie. Like, might suit the tone better if they turned it into that.
Anyhow, so we have quite thoroughly, I think, discussed the Church on Ruby Road, the new Doctor, the new companion, and where things are going. And I think it's very, very fair to conclude that it's all looking a bit exciting. And I think that we're on for what's going to be a particularly good series in May, which feels so far away, but is absolutely nothing in comparison to the Doctor Who drought before the Star Beast. So it's not that long, not too long at all, and I'm looking forward to it. But that is all we have time for now. But we will be back for more spodcasting very soon. In the meantime, though, I will say goodbye to Mansoor.
Goodbye.
And I'll say goodbye to Greg.
See you next time.
Goodbye now.